Hey, it's Bill Tromley from Tromley Tool in East Troy, Wisconsin. Tonight's video is in regards to reactive versus predictive metal shaping. What do I mean by that? Anytime where we learn something new that is complex, we tend to be reactive in the beginning, and as your skill set and your knowledge grows, you become predictive. Give you an example would be learning to drive a car, learning to fly an airplane, learning to weld is an example, learning to metal shape. If it's learning to fly, in the beginning we say the airplane knows more about flying than you do. And what it is you have so much information that's coming at you, you tend to just react to it, which tends to, we say, is you're behind the airplane. And as your skill set develops, you become much more predictive in the process. Welding is the same way. For metal shapers, we all have to weld. And if you think back to when you first welded, all of the challenges that you faced, right? You had to, you can't see very well. You have to maintain the torch distance above the part. You have to try to insert a filler rod. It's dark, you can't see inside the welding helmet. Now you got to move across the surface. You have to control the heat. You're melting your welding gloves, and on and on and on. It's a challenge. And as that skill set develops, you're going from being reactive to it to becoming predictive, and predicting how much pedal to put on it and how to control the heat and how to control where the heat is applied on the joint and so on. And metal shaping is no different. So what this video is about is to try to help give you some of that, some thought and maybe a couple ideas that might help with that. We're all guilty of this. I know I am. One thing to think about. When it comes to welding is an example. If you're new to welding, the best thing that we recommend is for you to practice. To practice laying beads over and over again. People have reached out to me in the past, like through Facebook Messenger, and they say, I have this problem welding, and can you coach me and give me a couple pointers? And you tell them to, they have all of these issues, and you talk them basically through the process, and you say, just lay out the bead on the surface, right? And just control the inputting of the filler rod as you move along. And they'll do it, and they'll send me a picture, and it looks, has some issues, and you discuss it with them, and they go, oh, and the kind of light bulb goes off, and their room gets a little bit brighter because of it, and they try it again, and they try it again, and they get a good looking weld. But oftentimes what happens then is they want to advance themselves right away. That instead of just laying weld beads, this is what happens. Following day, all of a sudden they get a message, and they're all upset, they got problems. And they just can't figure out why, when they're trying to do this overhead pipe joint in aluminum, that they're having all of these issues with their weld. Well, you could barely glue your fingers together the day before welding on a flat sheet, and now you're trying to do some of the most difficult welding processes that there is without doing any of the work in between. And us as metal shapers, we do the same thing. I'm guilty of this. So how do you go about it? What would be some good ideas or concepts that maybe would help? And that's kind of what this video is about. Is in the beginning, make a simple buck. A simple piece to make. Not crazy geometry to it. It doesn't have to have a wicked reverse curve in it or anything. It's just a simple high crown panel. And then accurately, or do the best you can to make the part as accurate as possible, and keep track of your time and write down notes. accurately lay out the panel is the best way that you know how. Keep track of your time and do the best you can. You'll expose weaknesses in your skill level. And we all have that. No one's born with the gift to be able to just go right into it. Once you build your first part, build it again. Try it again. Give it another shot. And do the same process. Accurately lay out your panel. Accurately use a paper pattern the best way you know how. Accurately transfer that information to it. And accurately try to pay attention to when you do something, what the result is. You know, shaping is stretching and shrinking. If you over shrunk it, then you know that the only solution to fix it is to stretch it back out. But accurately make those notes. Keep accurate track of your time. More than likely what you'll discover is your second part went slightly faster than your first part. Just like welding, we don't hesitate for anybody to tell them to go home and practice laying beads. If you go into a welding school, it's 10% knowledge and 90% practice is what I say. And there's a lot of truth in that. And we lay beads and we practice. People ask me, how long should I practice? For an hour? Like, you shouldn't practice for an hour. Should I practice for a day? You shouldn't practice for a day. You should practice for weeks before you go on to the next one. Why? You're creating the muscle memory. The process is slowing down to you, right? You can see it as it's developing, and you can see where the mistake was and slowly prevent that mistake from occurring. Same thing happens with metal shaping. I've never heard it discussed in this way of practice making the same part. We always just move on to the next piece. We also tend to pick extremely complex parts to make. In the past, I've shown this now several times. This is a Fairchild 24 wheel brake cover. And everyone goes, that's just a bowl. Like that? Well, that's easy to make. Okay, is it? This is a high crown panel. So we know in high crown panels that you stretch the center and you shrink the edge. So this panel, when I made it, I stretched the center out to here, that line, and I thumbnail die shrunk it all the way around to here. This was not metal spun. This was done with thumbnail die shrinking and stretching. Consistency in your layout and being accurate in the process makes it so that when this is done, it's a round, uniform bowl. It's not egg-shaped. So how did they do it? Well, from the center line, I had actually laid out 6 quadrants that were on here. And in each quadrant, however I shrunk it was the same each quadrant all the way around. If I went in there 2 times, then I went in each quadrant 2 times all the way around. Then I cleaned up the geometry, checked it to the buck, made my marks, and proceeded on to the next phase of more shrinks. And by doing that, it ended up with a perfectly round part. And each time I would shrink, the part would go like this, like this, like this, and like this until it fit the buck. And it was due to consistency and accuracy. Why is that important? It's a simple piece. A lot of people think that's the easy one to make. The knowledge that it takes to make that accurate is the same in all high crown panels. So if you can accurately make that, you can start accurately making other high crown panels that don't happen to look like a bowl. Give you an example. So we have in our shop right now is a rare Vincent Series A repeat motorcycle. And those motorcycles that are built in England, they come with a logbook. And we had found in its records that this motorcycle was sold with a set of alloy fenders. Right now on it is a set of steel fenders. So I'm making a set of alloy fenders for it. This material here is 3003 H14 by 60 thousandths thick, no annealing. I'm shaping this totally just an H14 material. This is the front fender here, and it's 37 inches long. The rear fender is 54 inches long. So this fender, I laid out some lines, and I'll show that. This fender is in process. This is not finished at all. And I'll explain to you briefly about that in a little bit. This buck here, piece of 3/4 inch MDF. This radius here is a 14 3/4 inch radius. I cut that out in my Bridgeport milling machine. Why? I have a Bridgeport milling machine. Why wouldn't I? Did it on the turntable. Right? You want a fender that looks uniform and consistent. It's only as good as your buck. The buck is the foundation. Make good quality bucks, you get good quality parts. We've talked about that in the past. Here, what are these? These here are just aluminum plates. And all I did was, from the center line out, I think it's every 10 degrees or something like that, I took and ran it through a bandsaw and a bandsawed in the slit. Measured the slit, found a piece of aluminum that was thick, so when you'd tap it in there, it'd be a tight fit. And then, with a compass, I cut out these rib stations here. And it's 2.5 inch radius going this way. So it's 2.5 this way, 14 3/4 going that way. Simple, clean, accurate buck. If you look at parts like this is the front fender, and this fender here, the shape that's in this fender is more than likely pretty darn close, if not almost right on. The form needs to be adjusted, but this is directly out of the machine. This was done with using a power hammer right there, with plastic tooling. A lot of you guys who might have know who I am or watched some of my videos know that I shape almost exclusively with plastic tooling. So in that power hammer is Stan Fulton's 2-inch square thumbnail dies that are plastic. Those are the same dies I'd run in a Polmax machine. But they're in that power hammer. And then in the other machine, which is right next to it, let's see, yeah, they're right there. And I'll demonstrate that. This Echold machine has a set of CP plastic plenishing hammer dies in it. And I'll show you why here shortly. If you look at this piece, this is directly out of those two machines. This is the tool marking that exists. You can see the thumbnail die marks here, and you can see how I evened it out in the Echold machine. I'll demonstrate that shortly. I did stretch the center. So how did I stretch it? Well, you can't stretch with plastic tooling very efficiently. You can, but I don't like the result. So I put steel on steel dies in a power hammer, and I pre-stretched this center. And then plastic shrunk the edge. And continue down in the process. So this is not to show that I make high quality parts or to show finished pieces. This is to show parts in process. But look at the surface finish that I have. Why is that important? Where am I going with this? Why am I showing this off? It allows you to be predictable in the process. And that's what this video is about. If you look at this fender here, this fender is the rear fender. This one is further along, has just been started in the process, excuse me. So in the center, this has been stretched in the power hammer, and this has the first set of shrinks going on the edge. So how did I do it? If you notice here, CL, means center line, and that's the center distance going around the hoop like this. So it's the middle this way. And then every 3 inches I have this blue line here. Now they're rubbed off because there's oil on the power hammer and it wipes off some of the magic marker line. There's a black line, you can kind of see it right there, that goes this way. That goes like this here. And that shows me how deep to bring in the shrinks. So how did I know this? With a paper pattern. Well, I show a paper pattern. That's not what this video is about. The concept is paper pattern tells you where to accurately stretch and shrink. Take that information and accurately put it on the part. And then you got to be extremely consistent about it. Why do I need to be consistent about this piece? Because I need it to be a fender that's uniform this way and this way when I'm done. So consistency becomes important. And when I'm consistent, I get a predictable outcome, which makes the metal shaping process become easier. So now that I have this panel roughed out where this thumbnail die shrunk on here and it's stretched in the center, I'm going to show how I clean this up in the Echold machine. And you got to do this without killing myself in the process. I know some of you guys don't like my camera process, but I still like my camera process. So what's in here? 24-inch CP die plastic upper, 3-inch radius lower, or a 2-inch radius lower, excuse me. And then this orange piece in there is a piece of rubber, a piece of urethane. And what that is a shock absorber. You never want to run pieces of equipment like this with negative clearance where the dies are bottoming out, and because that can wreck the internals to the machine. Same thing with a Polmax machine. Would I wreck my machine? I don't know, but I don't want to find out by blowing it up. So having that rubber block in there, it gives it a little bit of give. It's just a shock absorber. So what am I using this for? Well, that is to clean up these irregular edges from where the thumbnail dies end to where it's stretched in the center. And I'll show you why. It's an important aspect. Why plastic tooling? Can't create a stretch with plastic tooling, right? I'm shrinking here. Well, if I put in a shrink, why would I want to go use steel on steel dies and stretch where I just shrunk? You know, steel on steel will cause a stretch, so you're putting in the shrink and you end up taking it out with steel on steel tooling, where plastic tooling won't. So it just evens out the surface. You know, it's a way of leveling it out. Do you need to have an Echold machine to do this? No. Plastic dies, you could use it on a plenishing hammer and get the same result. If you made holders like this, you could use them in your Polmax machine and get the same result. So you don't have to have all of this equipment to be able to make high quality parts. Why is this important? Well, we're going to go back over here to the buck. If I even out the geometry on the part, and it's now as uniform can be, I can now place the part back on the buck and figure out where it's not touching the bark, accurately mark those areas that are not touching the bark, and continue to shape those areas until they do. So you have to make this uniform and clean, in my opinion. This is how I make accurate, clean looking parts. You can see here my magic marker lines are rubbing off. So once I have the part uniform, like how this piece is, if I have to add more shape to it, I wipe it all down, I reapply my magic marker lines, and now I have new lines to go to. It makes it so it's an accurate, clean, predictable process versus helter-skelter. So what do I mean by that? In the beginning, we tend to make parts that look maybe something more like this. So you can see it's got walnuts in the center and it's got some shrinking on the edge, but you know, there's more shrinking here than maybe there is over here, but the shrinks here were closer to the edge and these were deeper. So this here would be just like that wheel fender. And we tend to shrink or shape in the beginning like this. We tend to be reactive to it instead of predictive. The danger with that is, and we're all guilty of this, I'm hugely guilty of this, is it becomes to the point where you start losing control of the panel, right? And you know, we know that we should stretch in the center and shrink in the edge. Well, as you're losing control of the panel and you're just reacting to the issues as they pop up, before you know it, you're stretching on the edge and trying to shrink in the center, and you know, it's just chaos. And that's because you're not accurately applying the information to the part. There's videos out there that touch on this. Mike Wagner from Cornfield Customs. I don't know him. I've not met him. Has some great videos on this stuff. He has a comment that he uses, and I think it's measure small, miss small, right? Or you got to be as precise as you can. The more precise you are, the smaller your error is. And he's 100% correct. And that's by putting this information on there and keeping track of your process. And then accurately make a part and then use that as a practice piece and make another one that matches it. And keep an accurate track of your time and your process. Guys, look at this process, and I've gotten this comment actually quite a bit. They go, well, you're an airplane guy, so it needs to look that good. I am an airplane guy. This is for a motorcycle. There's no airworthiness here. This is how I shape. This process makes clean, accurate parts. And guys go, well, I'm about making money, you know, so I gotta just wang it out as fast as possible. Okay, I like making money, so you gotta keep that in mind too. People say that the first 80% you can do the quickest, the last 20% takes 90% of the time. And I understand that point. And some of that, and this doesn't apply to everyone, but that's what makes parts that look like this. Reconciling the issues in this takes 90% of the time. You wang this thing out in a few minutes, but it's so helter-skelter, trying to reconcile the problems is difficult. What about if you don't have this equipment? Right? What about if you're using a bossing mallet and a stump and a sandbag? If you looked at very accomplished metal shapers, and I'll use an example as like Peter Tomasini. He uses his bossing mallet in a wood stump or in a sandbag. If you watch his process, he's extremely accurate and precise as far as where he adds the stretch and where he adds the shrink. He's doing the same thing that is being done here. We're just doing it with power tools. So accuracy matters. It allows for you to be predictive in the scenario instead of just purely reacting and trying to put fires out. That's very challenging. So instead of having it where that last 20% takes 90% of the time, it's easier to look at it and go, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to the project. I don't rough it out where I'm winging it out as fast as I can and spending all this time trying to clean it up at the end, and nothing fits the buck, and then you're trying to reconcile where and why. Be more methodical in your process. Be more accurate in your process. Helps to get you from the reactive phase to the predictive phase. And it works. It does. If you put in, let's say the part is fitting the buck, and you shape it more and it fits the buck, and you shape it more and it fits the buck, you shape it more and it doesn't fit the buck. Because you're predictive in the process, you know where the issue lies is in the last thing you did. So check your parts on the buck often. How often? My parts go on the buck many times. Can I say hundreds of times? Probably hundreds as much. But it's going on, I do a one row series of shrinks, and it goes back on the buck, and it goes accurately on the buck every time. And that way, if the part is fitting and it's fitting and then it's not, then I know the issues in the last thing I did. You know, one of the things that I reference at metal meets and stuff like that is you see guys in the English wheel, and it's like, I always say it's like they're listening to Barry Manilow, right? And they're wheeling and they're shaping and shaping and shaping and shaping, and they put it on the buck and they slide the part around on the buck like it's covered in Crisco. And they go, oh, look at that, it fits, right? And then they go back and they're shaping and shaping and shaping and shaping and shaping, and they put it back on the buck and they slide it around. And now it fits over here. And they're like, oh, look at that, it fits over there. It doesn't fit anymore over here, right? And they're just purely reactive to it. And what's happening is fires are breaking out on the panel, and it's progressively getting worse and worse and worse. So what happens, they just purely start reacting to it. The panel is dictating the process. You're not dictating to the panel what to do, the panel is dictating to you what you need to do. And all of a sudden it just gets worse and worse and worse. More fires are developing on the panel. And I always say it's when it gets to the point where it's so bad that now you got a 4-alarm blaze going on the panel, and that would be something like this, 4-alarm blaze on the panel, and it's so bad the fire chief comes along and says, let the house burn to the ground. Which means you as the metal shaper means take the part and throw it in the garbage can and start over. Well, that's because issues, you didn't catch them soon enough because you weren't on the buck enough, grow and grow and grow and get worse and worse and worse. So you're just purely reacting to it instead of being predictive to it. These panels here, both of them have issues. These issues, though, are small issues. So they're glowing ambers on the surface. I can see the issue and I can just put my thumb on it and put the fire out. Right? And then there's another little problem over there, and I can address it and just put the fire out. And what happens then is the part is progressively getting more and more shape until it fits and it's correct. So I hope that makes sense and something to think about. If you say to a welder, go out and practice, it makes sense. You say to a pilot, go out and practice, that would make sense. When you would get your driver's license to go out and practice driving around in a cemetery, makes sense. When it comes to metal shaping, nobody ever talks about going out and practicing and learning from some basic panels like this and realizing that the processes that exist in this exist in all the panels that we build as metal shapers. So you become accurate with that, the easier it becomes to accurately make more complex pieces. And that makes you a better metal shaper. So hope that makes sense and that's reasonable. Like, subscribe, tell all your friends, put comments down below. If you guys want more content, let me know. If you want to see more on thumbnail die shrinking, I've done a number of videos on that. We can show that more, how I'm doing it. You know, this, like I showed though, that's directly out of those set of thumbnail dies. There's no plenishing, hammering, or sanding, or anything. There's no Scotch Brite, any of that. That is as out of the piece of equipment. And there's nothing that's special here. This is all doable with the equipment that you have as well. Those thumbnail dies, if you don't have a power hammer, can be done in a Polmax machine. Stump shrinking and a wood stump and a bossing mallet could get you the same result. So accuracy makes quality, quality makes easy parts, and good quality parts is what we're shooting for. And I hope that makes sense. So if you want to see more of that content and help maybe answer some more of that, let me know. If paper patterning would help, let me know. But like I said, there's a lot of videos out there on that. Like I referenced, Cornfield Customs, he does a lot of great stuff on paper patterning, and I recommend that you watch that stuff too. There's a lot of great content out there from a number of metal shapers, and you can learn from all of them. It's how I do it, and I recommend that. So hope that's all good, and have a good evening. Thanks. Bye.